Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday, July 7th, 2022 meeting of the Humboldt County Planning Commission. And in accordance with Assembly Bill 361, the Planning Commission meeting will be held virtually. Please go to the county website and you can see the different ways to join us. With that, I will call the meeting to order and ask everybody to join me in a salute to the flag, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Tripp, I'd ask you for a roll call, please.
Alan Bongio.
Here.
Noah Levy.
Nobody on Zoom can hear you guys.
Alan Bongio.
Here.
Noah Levy. Brian Mitchell.
Present.
Mike Newman.
Here.
Melanie McCaver.
Here.
Peggy O'Neill.
Here.
And Thomas Mulder.
Present.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. Is that because I unmuted myself? Yeah, I unmuted when Brian. How come it's not letting me unmuted?
Right.
Okay.
I'm going to do something else here too, which is, oops, go here.
Probably should have did that when he said he couldn't hear any of us. I unmuted, yeah.
Right, that's on Tripp's side.
All right. Sorry, Trip. All right. So it looks like we have 6 commissioners here, so we're good. Apologize for the sound problems. Director, do we have any agenda modifications tonight?
Yes, we do. We have a couple modifications we'd like to make. There are 2 supplementals that I apologize they're given to you today in a hard copy. Commissioners that aren't present, I think that they loaded into Legistar? And okay.
They're on Dropbox.
Very good, thank you. So the first modification to the agenda is on the consent calendar. It's item number 10. It's MHG LLC. Simply, we will want to remove that from consent. One of the things, we got a letter expressing concerns about that, so we will remove that and address the concerns that are being addressed or raised. Moving down under public hearings to section H is items number 3 and 4. We will ask for a motion on those to continue those to the meeting of July 21st. And then on item number 2, it's a minor housekeeping item, but it's actually very important, is the recommendation says approval of the modification to the coastal development permit. It's not a modification, it is the coastal development permit. So
That's on the PG&E one?
correct.
So get rid of the word modification.
Correct. I just want to make sure that if that's the motion that the commission chooses to use, that it is correct.
Okay. So would you like to take care of all those during consent, those changes? Or do we need to open up the public hearing and then continue those 2
So
items?
for the continuances, it'd probably be good to see if there's anybody that wants to talk about those now.
Then, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But if you wanted to do it now,
I just was thinking to get it out of the way, but that's okay. It probably is better because there could be somebody that wants to speak on it. Yeah, so that's a good point. All right, so with that, I'll move on to item number D, which is public comment, and this is the time when anybody can speak on any item that is not on tonight's agenda. So if there's anybody who wishes to speak, please go ahead now. If you're in the audience, come up to the microphone, and if not, let's see if I can get, I've got, okay, public 7429. You there?
Good evening, Commissioner. Yes, good evening, Commissioners. This is Roby Tenorio, and there are 3 projects on your consent agenda tonight that all use wells for their cannabis farms irrigation. And I do understand that the option of using wells for irrigation was really encouraged because it was unregulated. But the danger that we have is that now we're putting wells in new areas much farther up in the watersheds, and we don't know what the impacts of this expansion and extraction will be. And it's become pretty clear that this new development needed much more study. And I was wondering what is going on with the data gathering and analysis that was being done by a hydrogeologist. I believe she worked for a company, LAFCO. So I just was wondering what state that analysis in, because right now, in pretty much every meeting, you're given projects that are recommended by staff for approval that are reliant on groundwater extraction from wells that have been deemed likely to be disconnected from surface water. And each staff report says basically the same thing: a permitted well that's been reviewed by a licensed geologist and found to be disconnected to surface water. Or maybe to change it up, a low probability of connection to surface water. So we now have a whole new term to use, hydrologic isolation analysis. And I understand that you as commissioners must rely on the professionals and the experts for their opinions, but please be aware that lately pretty much all the wells are being found to be likely disconnected from surface water by the same geologist who is not a hydrogeologist. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak at this time? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period. We'll move on to item number E, discussion of remote meetings. And Director, do you have anything to say, or just ask for?
This is pretty much
Yeah.
something you've done several times before.
All right. Anybody like to make a motion to continue authorizing remote teleconference meetings?
So moved?
Thank you, Brian. Any discussion on that motion? All right. Tripp, roll call vote, please.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Thomas Mulder,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
and Melanie McCaver.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Tripp. Motion carries unanimous. All right, so that brings us to the consent calendar, item number F. And we were asked by the director to remove item number 10. Will that just we'll have to make a special motion for that to remove it?
Consider removed.
Okay, all right. So is there anybody who would like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar or have any questions on any?
I have some comments, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So regarding the minutes, in reviewing such a large quantity of them, it became clear that different methodologies were used and they're not consistently applied in terms of, let's say, at the beginning of a meeting, 4 commissioners are present, you make 1 or 2 motions, a 5th commissioner comes in 4 minutes later. How is that presented in the minutes? There's 3 different ways it's presented. And I'll note specifically that it was never clarified the meeting for the Arcata Roundabout project. that both Commissioner Mulder and myself ever entered the meeting. So that needs to be corrected for sure. And I would just say to staff that we should, of the three ways of noting that, we should probably pick one and be consistent.
Could we just have these removed? We'll take a look at that, and we'll bring it all back to you.
Okay. So do you want a motion that
Nope,
way?
You don't need
or-
to. These are not public hearings. These are just actions.
Okay.
So-
So we're just going to move on from, well,
Just-
whatever else.
We're
is
just
on-
going to pull 1 through 9 off consent and not take action on it tonight. And we'll bring them back on the 21st.
Sounds good. Makes that easy. Thank you. So that brings us to item number 11, which is the Dyerville Farms LLC conditional use permit and special permit in the Garberville area. Is there anybody who wishes to have this item pulled? And I do see a hand up in the attendees, so I'll pull it. And then item number 12, the Fruitland Ridge Farms LLC special permit in the Myers Flat area. Is there anybody who wishes to have this item pulled? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience who, seeing none, we will leave that on consent. So it looks like to me we have one item pulled and one item that our consent's just gonna be item number 12.
Correct.
So could I get a motion to approve the consent calendar, which is just item number 12, the Fruitland Ridge Farms LLC special permit in the Myers Flat?
So moved.
Thank you, Brian. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Chair. And just, can I make a brief disclosure just to be completely transparent?
Yes.
This project is roughly 3/4 of a mile from a property I own, has no cannabis on it, and it's about a mile from a cannabis project. So just being transparent about that.
All right. Thank you. So any other comments? All right. Drip, roll call vote, please.
Thomas Mulder,
Yes.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver.
Yes.
Thank you, Tripp. Motion carries unanimous. All right, that brings us to item number G, which is items pulled from consent, and that would be item number 11. That one just got removed from consent. This one we had pulled.
Well, that's the same.
Oh, I thought that you were removing it and to bring it back to us. I'm sorry, I misunderstood
No, it's just
that.
remove it from consent.
Oh, I didn't know, okay. I thought you were gonna bring it back to us like you were the rest of it.
Yeah,
That-
nope, that one we're ready to act on tonight.
Apologize, just misunderstood that.
Yep.
So that brings us to item number 10, MHG LLC conditional use permit in the Alder Point area. We'll take a staff report.
Good evening, Chair Bongio. Can you confirm that you can see my title screen and hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the commission. I'm Stephen Santos, Senior Planner, presenting the MHG LLC conditional use permit. The project is in the Alder Point area and takes access from Rancho Sequoia Drive. The legal parcel is approximately 10 acres with a residential agriculture RA land use designation and an FR forestry recreation zoning with a B510 combining zones. Please note that the parcel lines from this GIS excerpt are slightly askew. The project is for a conditional use permit under 1.0, the CMMLUO, and it's for 18,492 square feet of existing outdoor cultivation in greenhouses using light deprivation techniques. It's supported with an 1,800 square foot nursery. The annual water budget is 223,000 gallons, which comes out to just under 11 gallons per square foot. and there's 40,000 gallons of storage in hard tanks supporting the irrigation. The irrigation source is a well, and we do have a report from a geologist, from David Lindbergh, that has concluded that the well is likely disconnected from surface waters. The well is existing and permitted. The project relies on a generator for fans and for the processing building. The project does include the standard condition to migrate to renewable energy by 2026. There will be on-site processing, and the project does involve on-site relocation. The former site had more than 15% slopes, with portions within stream buffers, and the relocation site is less than 15% slopes and within an approved CAL FIRE less than 3 acre conversion. The energy condition of approval can be found in A5 of the conditions of approval, and a summary of the restoration appears on page 4 of the staff report and incorporated into condition A4. Here's an excerpt of the plot plan, and you can see the layout of the light deck greenhouses in the conversion area. As noted by the director at the beginning of the meeting, we did receive one public comment. I received an email yesterday morning objecting to the permit, and that email contained 7 concerns. And I'll summarize those concerns along with staff response. The first concern is that the generator will create noise and toxic exhaust. The staff response is the generator is approximately 1,000 feet from the commenter's residence. We have conditions of approval that provide noise performance standards, as well as the condition of approval previously mentioned about transitioning to renewables by 2026. Concern number 2 is use of the well for irrigation will impact the spring on the commenter's property. As mentioned prior, a geologist evaluated the well for connectivity to surface waters and concluded likely not connected. The next concern is that water storage is not adequate. The staff response is that the irrigation source is not rainwater catchment, nor is it subject to forbearance. So the 40,000 gallons of storage is adequate for this type of project. The next concern is that the smell will make the property inhabitable. This was interpreted by staff as just a typo from the commenter. We interpreted it as that they meant uninhabitable. The staff response is the commenter's residence is approximately 1,000 feet away, and plants are enclosed in light deck greenhouses. In addition, odor mitigation is only required in community planning areas. The next concern raised was excessive barking and concerns about dogs running loose. The staff response is that domestic animals are not regulated by the CMMLUO, and dogs are not mentioned in the operations plan or security plan. The next concern is that the access road cannot accommodate the traffic. This is an existing cultivation site, not new. And Rancho Sequoia Drive has an extensive road evaluation by an engineer, David Nicoletti, and participation in the Road Maintenance Association or paying fair share of road improvements is required in condition of approval A4. The last concern was that the cannabis grow would interfere with fire prevention, cleanup, and cause health issues. The staff response there is that the cultivation is proposed for an approved CAL FIRE less than 3 acre conversion area, and there's another property between the project parcel and the commenter's parcel. The staff recommendation is to consider the addendum to the adopted MND for the CMMLUO per the CEQA guidelines, make all the required findings for approval of the conditional use permit, and adopt the resolution approving the MHG LLC conditional use permit subject to conditions of approval. I will now surrender my screen and available for questions.
All right, any questions for staff? Go ahead, Peggy.
Could you address the comment that was made that it's a geologist, not a hydrologist, and what type of science that is required to show that it's not hydrologically connected?
Ooh, that is a big question. The guidance that the county uses is that either a certified geologist or a hydrogeologist have sufficient credentials to perform this type of analysis. And the analysis includes quite a number of criteria looking at the geological setting, what kind of hydrologic features are within 1,000 feet of the subject well, recharge rate, whether the information is available to determine if the water is coming from a confined aquiclude, and of course, most importantly, to render their professional opinion on whether it will draw from surface waters. So I know that I painted with a broad brush there, but that's essentially the approach.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions for staff before we open this up for public comment? You on the Zoom, my other commissioners, raise your hands so I can acknowledge you if you do have questions, please. All right, seeing none, I will open this up for public comment. Doesn't look like we have anybody here. And we have no hands up, so with that, I'll close the public comment. Oh, we got a hand up. 7108, go ahead.
Good evening. This is Bonnie Blackberry. I wasn't planning on commenting, but a couple questions about the noise, because generator noise can travel a long ways, and a lot of it depends on the location of the generator and the location of another residence. The 1.0, it had the ordinance that said basically if the neighbor at their residence can hear the generator, then it's too loud. And I know that it's got changed since then, and I'm just wondering if the 1.0 was if the neighbor can hear it, then it's too loud. And this is a 10-acre parcel, so that's not a whole lot of space. And we are in a historic drought and climate change. So that's like kind of a new reality from 2016 or whenever they applied for this. And this idea that a hydrogeologist or a geologist, I would think a hydrogeologist would know a lot more about the movement of water. So I thought the county was going to have a hydrogeologist, not just a geologist. But, and this idea that it's not connected, that's, people have different opinions of that. And I guess as the drought goes further, we'll find out more. But I also agree with whoever it is that commented that with the amount of water they're taking out of that well and only storing 40,000 gallons, would be really nice have more water storage. And what happened to the watershed maps that were supposed to be attached to each one of these? Okay, those are my comments for now. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Staff, want to answer any of those, or there's no?
I can answer the question about noise. Condition of approval C2 does incorporate the noise performance standard of 50 decibels at 100 feet. I'm sorry, at 50 feet. I'm sorry. 50 decibels at 100 feet or the forest edge, whichever is closer. And then I defer to my supervisor, my director on that credential question.
And I would just simply point out that Mr. Santos is correct about that, and the ordinance also does identify audible noise at residences. Apologize if the watershed maps were not made available. We knew last week that we were going to have some problems. We're in a bit of a bind with people being out right now, and so it was a tough week. In terms of the credentials, obviously a hydrogeologist specializes in the movement of water through the geologic features. But a geologist does study what those geological features are and whether or not there's separation between the geologic structures that are supporting the water. And that is really what is being looked for. Are there geologic features, are there layers that separate where the well is cased from where we understand the surface water to be?
Okay.
Chair Bongio, I do just want to add the watershed maps are on the county's website. If you go to the Planning Commission agenda, they are actually on that. So those have been provided.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, we got them. We got them here. Tripp brought them to us as well if you were here. So thank you. All right. Is there any other public that wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll close the public opinion and bring it back to the commission. Comment. Opinion. Sorry. All right. Any questions from the commissioners, or would somebody like to make a motion on this one? I see a hand up. Go ahead, Brian. I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to raise the topic of rain catchment. I know in the past we've added conditions of approval under certain circumstances that we'd like to see more of it. It doesn't read to me here that they have any of it, or certainly not enough of it, and was wondering if other commissioners would be willing to have that be an additional condition of approval. Thank you.
Any commissioners have thoughts on that? Go ahead, Thomas.
I'm not in support of that. Just on consent, we approved a project larger than this with the same amount of storage. So I wouldn't see that we would have the basis of the findings to go forward with that. So I would not support that.
All right. Any other thoughts on that? Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I know that we have talked about that in the past when it's been pretty much just well water as a backup. But usually that's talked about with the permitted party and staff ahead of time. And usually here, do we have the permittee on the line?
I don't know. I don't know if it didn't come up. I didn't see any name or on the attendees, so I'm not sure.
So I too remember that, Brian, and I understand what you're saying there, Thomas, because it was not pulled off of consent and looked at. Maybe perhaps we should have looked at that as well. But I would be open to other commissioners looking at that as well as something as a condition of approval for down the road because of the drought conditions that we are experiencing. I understand that the well is producing fine. It's just for down the road, I believe. We've had numerous projects, have we not, Director, talked about that were well water and get some rain catchment in there?
It has been discussed. I think that there may have been one where you actually made that change.
Yeah.
I would offer, if that's going to become a policy, that probably really is something that should be discussed and agendized separately from acting on individual projects, and then really we should run that up to the board to see if they want to incorporate that as a new policy.
That's exactly where I was going to go with it. I was going to bring up at the end of the meeting that the director and I had a discussion about a week ago after we found out that he was going to be staying with us, which is wonderful. And that we were going to come up with, spend some time and run some things up to the supervisors, and that could definitely be one, but so that we get consistency at the commission and not adding things to projects that we have consistency throughout. So, go ahead, Mike.
So which were the items that we brought up to the supervisors before, Director?
Primarily related to adding conditions relative to
Roads, electric. And,
Electric?
Yep. Roads and electric, yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't do this at that time
No.
then, huh? Yeah, I
So I
think
think
it's worth the time. At least put that one as number one there, and then we can maybe, as we're going along here, talk about anything else that might be added to it.
I have something.
Go ahead, Paige.
Previously, I think I brought that up, or we discussed, what our roles were in light of the drought, and I think I was told that the supervisors was working on something, but I don't know if we ever found out what the outcome of that.
Well, there is a drought task force that meets and talks about drought response, and that still is ongoing. I think from a well standpoint, one of the things that we are ongoing and that we are working on, and this is something that a member of the public brought up, is we are establishing a baseline for some of the watersheds to understand where the wells are. And then that's going to be used for a pilot project to start to understand how wells may affect that watershed. And that work is ongoing. It's really not possible to do that comprehensively for the entire county.
One of the things I'd like to say is that you can't just say, well, it's even across the board. We didn't do it this time, so we shouldn't do it that time. What affects my decision is your impacts on your neighbors. And if your neighbors have a water system that they're relying on, and your new project is going to impact that, and often it's in domestic use of water, I think that we need to look at it sometimes individually and not just across the board, because a new commercial business should not impact domestic use, and a lot of times these are side by side. And for an economic benefit, it's really should be encouraged that you do catchment, because those wells can fail, and I've seen them fail fairly quickly. Even a little earthquake took out our well, so you should have a backup plan. And so, maybe we can't tell you what to do economically, but we should certainly encourage rain catchment or progressing into that. And I do not think we should impact other people's water sources,
Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing. Mr. Santos, did we do a test to determine the impact on adjacent wells for this? That should have been done.
I'd have to take another look at the Lindbergh's report on whether there are any wells within 1,000 feet of this well.
Okay,
So give me a moment, I'll consult that.
thank you. I just wanted to say that is currently a requirement of state law. And so that is something that we've already incorporated into our standard practice to make sure that we're not adversely affecting either
but
public.
what if we miss it and it comes back that it does have an impact? Is there any recourse to go backwards, or is it just too late?
Well, once it's approved, there is no recourse to go back.
So it's really incumbent upon the neighbors to make their position known, And if they have been having water issues, and any small impact could have a major impact if you don't have that much water to begin with. And I know in a lot of these areas come, July, August, September, it's really touch and go on how much water you're gonna have. So it does matter, and it can matter differently. I mean, if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're not gonna impact anybody and your well goes dry, that's just gonna impact you. But if it's, gonna impact other people or people down the hill from you.
All right. Melanie, I see you've put your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. I think that we've been fairly consistent in terms of the conditions we've added for rainwater catchment, but I agree that there are inconsistencies that should be addressed, namely one that was just raised by Commissioner Mulder that is problematic, where, for example, projects that don't get pulled off of consent, and, for better or for worse, there haven't been a whole lot of those for various reasons over the last year. But I do see that as a problem. Projects that aren't pulled off of consent aren't subject to the conditions that we may be putting on consistently. So I would love to see this go to the supervisors. I too thought that it was on the list of issues that we wanted to raise with them, but definitely should have been, and I would like to see some sort of policy developed in terms of that. I think that it would be a good idea to require a certain percentage of rainwater catchment, looking at the numbers for Humboldt County and the average size of catchment area and average millimeters of rain, and coming up with a uniform percent that every farmer, no matter what enterprise it is, should be required to collect. So I don't think it would be difficult to come up with something like that would be fair, and I agree that we should move in that direction. As for the item tonight, I'm in favor of adding rainwater catchment simply because that is what we have been doing in the past.
All right. Thank you. Director, you had got my attention, I should say.
I did, thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to say the direction of the board, I mean, you could add a condition to require rainwater catchment tonight. Is the board's direction is that conditions could be added subject to making the appropriate findings. The hesitation that I would have in having that action taken tonight is that we really don't know. There's been no calculations done in terms of whether or not rainwater catchment could be done here, whether or not it would require removal of trees, what the slopes are, whether or not it required grading to either get a pond in or to get tank sites on the ground. And so we need also to have the applicant look at the amount of rainfall to determine how much water could actually be collected. So if it is the desire of the commission to require rainwater catchment on this, then I would submit that this should probably be continued to a date uncertain to allow us to work with the applicant to do that.
Okay. Go ahead, Mike. Thank you, Director. And then Stephen Santos has his hand back up.
He's probably found what I just did. Says there's 2 other wells within 1,000 feet of this subject well.
Okay,
That's
go
on
ahead.
page 109.
Go ahead, Stephen.
And also on page 2 of the geologist report, which appears on page 100 of the staff report, very last sentence at the bottom of the page, the water source from which this well draws appears to be a subsurface aquifer isolated from any near surface aquifers and not hydraulically connected to nearby domestic wells, surface waters, or wetlands. So nearby domestic wells were looked at as part of this analysis.
All right. Thank you. Thomas, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, then the other part that was on page 110, that also in that addendum, they're saying it's not going to affect, most likely won't affect the other wells. But I heard one of my fellow commissioners say something about a new cultivation, and I just wanted to clarify through the chair to staff, this is an existing cultivation site, and the way I read it, how long has this well been in operation for this existing site?
That can be found in the water section of the staff report. I can only answer in terms of the well was permitted in the 2016 to 2017 fiscal year by Division of Environmental Health.
Thank you for that. And that's kind of what I was meaning, that it's an existing well with an existing cultivation site.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. Is there any other questions or thoughts on this one?
I had one.
Go ahead, Melanie.
It's a timeline question. I was just hoping the director could maybe give us an idea of how long, this is in terms of, let's say we continue it or not, how long it would take to come up with a draft policy on percent rainwater catchment, given location, size of roof, and perhaps the well connectivity, so that it would be easy for the planners, to have a table. If you have, this, then you have to collect this, so however many millimeters of rainwater per year. So, different factors would be the size and the location and the watershed and the wells and feasibility and so forth. And so I think it would be helpful if we knew what the timeline might be for that in terms of moving forward and not having to continue items indefinitely.
Go ahead, Director.
To come up with a formal policy that looks at percentages and things, that's something that will require not only research and trying to put together empirical information to the extent that we have it available, consulting with hydrogeologists and hydrologists, and working with the cannabis community. That is probably a 3 to 4 month exercise at least.
All right.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I still don't feel comfortable all of a sudden saying, okay, well, let's not ask for any rainwater catchment for 3 to 4 months, given that we have been more or less consistently doing that. And in many cases, we are giving a time frame to that. So I'm wondering maybe what we should do instead is say that the applicants have to be in compliance with the forthcoming policy that will be in place in, like, let's say 6 months. But again, I would have to ask the director for his thoughts on that.
Go ahead, and then I have a thought on that.
Well, I think that would be difficult because this application was submitted and was brought forward to the commission without such a policy in place, and then requiring them to comply with a as yet undefined policy exposes an applicant to a great deal of risk. And they would have no ability to go forward with their project without knowing what they were going to have to do. It becomes a financial decision at that point. And I think that that probably would not be a workable solution if the commission is going to require a certain percentage of the water usage to be rainwater catchment. Then I would suggest that you at least do something that is identifiable, such as giving a certain percentage to be rainwater catchment out of the total water usage.
Thank you. Yeah, just looking back, I would say that we've been asking for 50% often in terms of rainwater catchment as a condition. So to be fair, perhaps we should be asking for 20% until we can move forward with something that's even more consistent and fair to all applicants, whether they get pulled off the agenda or not.
I was going to say this before I let Melanie go ahead of me, was that I think that before we do that, we should send something to the supervisors, a letter asking them to look at that. I agree that we should be doing it, but I don't think that we should be doing it the way we've been doing it, and that's just kind of picking it on this one and not on that one. And we need to get to where we have some consistency, and I think that we should ask them, because just like we did on the electric and we did on the roads, we asked them and they said, nope, keep it the way it is. And if you see something in a specific one, to bring it up, if you can justify it. But I think that that's what we're going to run up against. I believe that the trains left the station, and in the sense that the supervisors have decided that they're all in on cannabis, and I don't think we're gonna see much changes in the ordinance. Maybe we can get something, but I think that at the end of this meeting, we should have that discussion as to what we want to send to them, or at least agendize for the next meeting, that we're gonna have that discussion, so we have some time to come up with our thoughts on it. We already are gonna talk about propagation space tonight, but I think that it's something in the future. I think on this particular plan, unfortunately, we should stay the course and go with what has been proposed to us. I would like to see some rain catchment on it, but I don't know that it's the right thing to put it on it. So I'll leave it at that. And I think, Thomas, you put your hand back up.
Yes, I did, Chair. I got a bunch of different things here. For me, following the Board of Supervisors and realizing the staffing shortages and also the fact that they are on a hiring freeze, I don't know the realisticness of even trying to implement a policy change. It could also be asking for budgetary monies that aren't even there. So I definitely would feel that's on Board of Supervisors, not on the Planning Commission, to make those kind of financial decisions. Being as there's a geological report on page 100, page 109, and 110 that identifies that there won't be any negative impacts to the domestic wells on neighboring parcels. And the fact that they have 18% of water storage, 17.9 to be exact, water storage currently in their plan. I make a motion to find that the commission has considered the addendum to the adopted mitigative negative declaration for the commercial medical marijuana land use ordinance, CMMLUO, as described by section 15164 state CEQA guidelines, make all the required findings for approval of the conditional use permit, and approve the proposed MHG LLC project subject to the recommended conditions. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. Is there a second to that motion?
I still had a question.
Oh, okay.
Did you determine that the applicant's not available?
I did not.
Because I was wondering if they wanted to talk about this voluntarily.
Do you know if the applicant is with us tonight? I didn't see any name that stood out. I could look up what that is.
It does not appear that they are.
No, I didn't see that name. Okay. Go ahead, Director. Oh, I thought you had that look like you had something to say.
There's just a motion made.
I know. So is there a second? All right. Well, then the motion fails for the lack of a second. So what would the commission like to see happen here? Go ahead, Director.
Is it possible to put a condition down the road with rain catchment, that if a policy 5 years down the road, that they would need to comply with any change. That, I know what he's saying there. That's if we're doing it right away. I'm saying 5 years down the road so that there is a time frame.
The director said that he didn't feel comfortable with us doing that. I asked for the 6-month one earlier. But I think what we could do is just do something consistent with what we have been doing and asking for 20% rainwater catchment. And hopefully we'll have something worked out with the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Department within 6 months where, you know, we'll feel a lot better about the recommendations and conditions that we're asking.
And in this particular one, we did have a comment from, you know, the community that they thought it would impact their water system, so that could be the justification.
And we just heard that there's, from Mr. Santos, that there was 17.9, I think is what you said, store, or maybe that was Thomas that said that.
Right.
It was 17.9, I'm sorry, I got you guys mixed up. But that's pretty close to the 20%, so I mean, not that I like adding conditions, but I could live with 20% if that's something that everybody else would go along with. I see Brian has his hand up. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify what the director said previously, that if we did wish to add a condition requiring that there be additional water storage, that we continue this to give staff the time to determine the feasibility of that and the suitability of the site to handle rain catchment. Is that still your position, staff?
If we're going from 17.9% storage to 20% storage, no, I think that that's feasible. If we were trying to get to 50% storage, I don't know, maybe Mr. Santos has a better sense of whether or not that amount of storage could be supported, but without looking at that and understanding where the water's coming from, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that that's a viable condition.
And if I could also ask my fellow Commissioner McCaber, did you intend to say 20% in addition to the hard storage, or did you mean just 3% to make the total storage 17% hard storage and 3% rain catchment?
Yes, I was suggesting that we, until we have a policy worked out, perhaps in writing, or guidance from the supervisors with work from the planning department, that we ask for 20% of rainwater, 20% of their water be rainwater catchment annually. And that's just, you know, across the board. And like I said, that's kind of a low number relative to what we have been asking in the past, many times 50% or more, just until, you know, we have something that we can all feel more comfortable with in terms of the policy. And so, no, to answer your question, I wasn't necessarily imagining that the water stored currently just be bumped up to 20%. I mean, that is an interpretation that we can discuss as well. But my suggestion was that we ask that 20% of the projected water usage be collected as rainwater.
So I would definitely support that. And going back to staff, now that we're clarifying that it's an additional 20% rain catchment, do you still want us to move to continue this to give you the opportunity to talk to the applicant and make site-specific determinations?
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Chair. I would say that since there already is storage on the site, if the applicant figure out a way to capture the rainwater and put it into that existing storage, that would meet the intent. But if you're thinking about having a total of 40% storage on site, we haven't evaluated that to determine whether that's feasible.
Go ahead, Mike.
So I think if we put a condition that it would be for next year that the total storage would be 20% rainwater, that would probably be a doable thing. We're not going to tell them right now that that 40,000 gallons has to be rainwater when we're not really getting any rain until next season. And if we put the condition with the 20% being rainwater, we could put it for a year or 2 years down the road. And that, I think 2 years down the road would be fair for them to set up for that small amount.
Thank you.
Correct. The rainwater catchment would be, over the course of a year. And so, yes, it wouldn't be realistic to require that 20% of the projected annual water usage be collected as rainwater immediately, given that we're entering the dry season.
You do need 2 years if you're going to construct something and then collect water. Can't
Right.
do.
Agreed.
Could I have a condition for that to see if this scratches the commission's desire? Yeah. Is within 1 year, the applicant shall present a plan to the Planning and Building Department for review and approval, demonstrating that 20% of the water use will be through rainwater catchment. Within 2 years of project approval, that rainwater catchment system shall be in place.
Would that work for you,
That
Melanie?
sounds great.
That
Yes,
works
that
for
sounds
me.
great. Thank you.
That works for me as long as we add the required finding language. And I would propose that the public commentary received tonight, as well as the ongoing unprecedented drought, are the factors upon which we are basing our decision.
Okay.
Agreed.
Could I suggest that you be careful about the comment from the public, since there is a licensed professional who contradicts that? You can have it rely on the drought. But, I mean, in terms of what the public's saying, that is not based upon any scientific or engineered fact. The comment from a licensed geologist is a recognized expert.
True.
Perhaps instead, Commissioner Mitchell, we could reference the hydrogeological work in the report that does note that there are potential connections with neighboring wells.
Okay. Brian, do you want to take a shot at making a motion with that information in it?
So can I just offer the amendment to Thomas's motion to add the language proposed by the director?
That would be fine with me, if that's fine with everybody else.
That's fine with
I would
me.
second that.
Okay.
I would second that.
So probably since Thomas's motion was denied or didn't have a second, could you repeat your motion and then the director can add his words to the end of it? If you want to, Thomas. I mean, that's somebody else can make the motion as well.
I would say my motion, all these conditions of approval contradict my motion because I stated the findings in the geological report,
Yeah.
not to require the rainwater catchment. So it would contradict the condition of approval being added. So no, I'm not going to restate it.
I agree. So would somebody else like to make a motion?
I would move that we adopt the resolution to take the following actions. Find that the commission has considered the addendum, find that the planning commission has considered the addendum to the adopted mini-neg deck for the CMMLUO as described by section 15164 of the state CEQA guidelines, make all required findings for approval of the conditional use permit, and approve the project subject to the recommended conditions with the additional condition as mentioned by the director.
Director, would you like to add those words so
second
it's
that.
on the record? Thank you, Melanie.
Yes, and that is within 1 year of project approval, the applicant shall provide a plan for review and approval by the Planning and Building Department to implement a rainwater catchment system. Within 2 years of project approval, the rainwater catchment system shall be operational. And then I would add a new evidence to finding number 6 to indicate that it is necessary, it is necessary to require some amount of water from rainwater catchment in light of the historic drought and climate change conditions. And so a condition has been imposed to require rainwater catchment to protect the health, safety, and welfare.
Right. Thank you,
Sounds good to
Director.
me.
Mike, go ahead.
Were you saying anything about a 20% in there? Because I didn't hear that at all.
Thank you. The plan should be for 20% rainwater catchment.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Go ahead, Thomas.
I support the project. I'm going to be voting no against this because of the condition of approval. I think it's unfair and could actually open the county up for potential litigation by adding this condition of approval on a project more than half the size of a project that was approved earlier that that had the same exact amount of water storage. So that is why I can't support the condition of approval in place.
All right. Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, I will call for the vote. Tripp. Melanie.
Yes.
Oh, Tripp was asking who the second was. Nice.
Thomas Mulder,
No.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
and Mike Newman.
Yes.
All right, motion carries 5-1. Thank you, everyone. All right, we're at 7 o'clock. Before we start another one, why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll move on to item number 11, which is Dyerville Farms LLC conditional use permit. So see you back in 5 minutes.
Recording stop. Recording in progress.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're on item number 11, the Dyerville Farms LLC conditional use permit and special permit in the Garberville area. We'll take a staff report, please.
Thank you, Chair Bongio, members of the Planning Commission. Dyerville Farms is located, at 28525 Dyerville Road in the Garberville area. It's zoned agriculture exclusive and has a land use designation of agricultural grazing. The parcel is 183 acres in size. The applicant is seeking a conditional use permit for 24,634 square feet of existing cultivation. The majority of that is outdoor cultivation. A small portion of it is mixed light cultivation. And then plants are propagated in a 2,830 square foot nursery. The applicant is also requiring a special permit for work within the streamside management area. The source of irrigation is a permitted groundwater well. The applicant anticipates using 313,600 gallons of water annually, which equates to about 12.7 gallons per square foot. And there's just over 21,000 gallons of storage capacity in 6 tanks. The primary source of electrical power is a solar array with battery storage, and then there's a backup generator that's used as well. This is a site map that shows the location of the cultivation areas, as well as the groundwater well. The well was evaluated by David N. Lindbergh, who is a certified environmental geologist. The well has a yield of 40 gallons per minute. It's located more than 1,500 feet from the nearest surface waters and 270 feet above the nearest surface waters. And so David Lindbergh concluded that the groundwater well has a low likelihood of being hydrologically connected to surface waters. The report also notes, I'll note here, that the only well that's located within 1,000 feet of the permitted groundwater well is another well that's on the subject parcel that, due to chemical constituents in the water, makes the well unsuitable for irrigation purposes. And so that well is not being used, and the applicant has been conditioned to cap that well to ensure that it will not be used. The applicant, some conditions of approval that apply to this project, the applicant will need to reduce the size of the cultivation area to 10%, or the nursery, excuse me, to 10% of the total cultivation area. The applicant's also been conditioned to install monitoring devices on the groundwater well. There are recommended conditions in the Water Resources Protection Plan, as well as the Lake and Streambed Alteration Agreement, and this includes things like installing rolling dips, installing rock armor to fortify existing culverts, et cetera. And then there are standard conditions related to inadvertent discovery protocol and access roads. After analyzing all available documentation for this project, staff has found that the project is consistent with the impacts identified and adequately mitigated in the original mitigated negative declaration. The project as conditioned results in no significant adverse environmental effects beyond those identified in the MND. Staff would recommend that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to approve the conditional use permit and special permit for work in the streamside management area. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the project.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have a question for Alec?
I just have one. On the water resources, it says there's a well about 1,000 feet away, but it says it's not in use due to chemical constituents. Is that contamination?
That's my understanding based on what's in the report.
And there's no contamination in the well that's being used for the cannabis?
That's correct.
All right. Go ahead, Mike.
I wanted to ask staff about the water that is being stored right now, the percentage of it in the tanks that are there. What is that percentage?
The percentage would be roughly, let's see, 20. Let me do some quick math here.
This is all based on our prior conversations tonight, as well as in the past too, but especially tonight.
Somewhere between 6 and 7% of the total storage or the storage areas is
of their projected water usage.
That's correct. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for staff? All right. Thank you, Alec. With that, I'll open up to the public for public comments on this. And the first caller is, well, I have the applicant and one caller. So I'm going to go the caller first and let the applicant follow up at the end. So 7108, please.
Hi, this is Bonnie Blackberry again. I'm a neighboring parcel. This parcel is up above my property and a subdivision where there's multiple parcels. One of them has a well, and the planning department, the planning commission ruled that they needed to have a hydrogeologist to show that it wouldn't affect all the spring water that people have. This is up above, and one question is, when did the second well get drilled? And it was, I think it would be great to have more water storage. And for the whole issue of this, assuming most likely that these wells that you're permitting for commercial cannabis use will not affect any of the neighbors. But it's like, what happens when it does? Because I have heard of that happening. I would think you'd want to add a condition, if the geologist or who's ever saying most likely or whatever, that you add a condition that if, in fact, it does impact the neighbor's domestic water sources, then they need to cease use. Otherwise, you're approving something, and the consequences of that, it's going to be burdened on the people that, because it wasn't dealt with. And I would think, especially having no watershed baseline to really know, how all this is going to affect. And I guess you guys have the watershed maps. I couldn't find them. I went back and looked. But there's a whole lot going on around here, and a lot of wells and diversions. And we're in the driest area of the county, the southeast portion. I would think that would be a good
10 seconds, Bonnie.
Baseline. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak on this? Okay, then I'll have Dyerville Farms up. Thank you.
Hi, how are you guys doing today?
Welcome.
I drilled the well so we didn't have to use surface water. And there's a couple things I want to bring up. The well is at.
We just lost you.
And what?
Go ahead.
Are you there?
Yeah, now you are. You blacked out for a second.
Okay. Okay. So it's actually an 80 gallon a minute well. And the 40 gallon a minute that Mr. Lindbergh's report talks about is talking about how if we pumped at 40 gallons a minute for 24 hours, we have 57,600 gallons per day is what it says the well will produce at half. Also, the nearest spring is 3,500 feet away. We're 500 or 600 feet above that. You know, the nearest well to ours is over 2,000 feet away. You know, and our well it produces really well. We have a very large piece of property. It's 200 acres. And Mr. Lindbergh is the professional here. He says that if we had 49 inches of precipitation in a year, we would store 81.6 acre feet or 26.6 million gallons of water per year on my property. I would think that that would be considered rain storage. And, you know, the well thing has been definitely getting kicked around in this county back and forth. And some wells are better than others. And you should definitely take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the public that wishes to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment and bring this back to the commission. So, where are we at, folks?
Well, I think this one's a little bit different in that it's a much larger parcel, more separation from the neighboring parcels than the last one. Can you not hear me? I said I think this one's a little bit different because it's a much larger parcel and there's more separation.
Anybody care to make a motion on this one, since there doesn't seem to be too much comment?
I just wanted to say that I feel there needs to be some level of consistency from project to project. That is all.
Okay. Melanie?
I think, thank you through the chair. I agree. I think that we should be asking for 20% of the projected water usage be collected as rainwater. Again, obviously not for this, coming next 8 months. It wouldn't, they wouldn't be able to start collecting currently. So in line with what we recommended last time in terms of a condition. And then I also had a question that I can save, but it's relevant right now, which was that a long time ago when we started requiring more or less, or at least consistently asking for conditions regarding solar generators and a couple of other things, we did have the planning department relay that to staff that is, would be a likely condition to be expected. And we did start to see a lot more of the projects include those things. And so I'm just wondering if maybe that's something that might happen again. And, it may not matter because I know that we are going to be pursuing a more consistent policy that can be applied easily. But I just thought I'd raise that. Thank you.
Thank you. So does anybody else have any more comments, or would somebody like to make a motion on this one? Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, I would like to make a motion that we, one, find the commission has considered the addendum to the adopted neg deck for the CMMLUO as described by section 15164 of the state CEQA guidelines, make the required findings for approval of the conditional use permit, and approve Dyerville Farms LLC conditional use permit and special permit as recommended by staff, subject to the recommended conditions, with the additional condition of within 1 year, the applicant shall submit a plan showing how they will provide 20% of the water use by rain catchment, and within 2 years of project approval, that plan shall be implemented.
All right, thank you, Brian. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mike. Any further discussion on the motion in the second? Thomas, go ahead. I just saw your
As
hand.
on the previous project, I support rain catchment. I think it's great. I don't support policy change, and I don't support inconsistencies. For that matter, I will be not able to support a good project because of the conditions of approval. I hope one day we understand that the water storage thing will be dealt with via policy through the drought task force. But I guess not tonight.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, Tripp, you're up. Roll call vote, please.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Thomas Mulder,
No.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell.
Yes.
Thank you, Tripp. Motion carries 5-1. All right, so that brings us on to, finishes everything that was off consent. So we're to public hearings then. And the first item is continued. We already dealt with that, the continuing it to, or do we need to continue the Vesuvio Gardens?
No, Vesuvio Gardens stays on.
You know, it says continue to
Oh,
July.
no, that's already done. I'm sorry. That's, right. It's, the recommendation's on the agenda.
Yeah.
So there's no other action you can take.
We don't have to do anything.
Right.
That's what I was getting at. I don't think I was asking the question correctly. So that brings us to item number 2, PG&E after the fact coastal development permit in the Trinidad area. So I'll take a staff report on this one.
Thank you, Chair Bongio, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Cliff Johnson. I'm going to be presenting this coastal development permit for electrical distribution facility in the Trinidad area. I think, are you guys seeing my screen? Looks like it?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So this is an application for a coastal development permit to permit an electrical transformer and voltage regulator system that was installed without first obtaining a coastal development permit. It's on Patrick's Point Drive in the Trinidad area. And so as part of the permitting effort, they are asking to modify what was already installed. And primarily the modifications would be to relocate it away from an adjacent private driveway entrance, where it's approximately, there's a utility pole 3 feet from the driveway entrance, and they're looking to relocate that approximately 15 feet to the north. So that would be roughly 18 feet from the driveway entrance. They are also asking to replace the existing 45-foot utility poles to be 55 feet in height, which would comply with the most recent utility standards. The reason for this project, the reason that the voltage regulator in particular was installed here in this location was to improve service reliability to customers along Patrick's Point Drive, and particularly to enable the service to continue without interruptions while they do improvements on some of the adjacent substations. So this slide here, I think really shows you exactly what's happening. You can see the existing transformer and voltage regulator system. And then they're looking to relocate this. You can see this is basically a mock-up of what's proposed. Again, this was installed. They did obtain an encroachment permit from the County Public Works Department, but they did not obtain the coastal development permit from the county prior to installing that. This is basically the site plan, and you can see the private driveway, and then you'll see basically 4 poles, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what is being what's being proposed here is that the existing pole number 1 would be removed. Poles number 2 and 3 would be relocated and replaced with taller poles. And then pole number 4 would be a new pole. This is an oblique aerial view which shows the regulator site. And then if you, this is on Patrick's Point Drive, going up to the top left of the screen, that's actually Patrick's Point. This was previously heard by the Planning Commission, and it was continued in order to seek some additional information as to the necessity for installing this facility in this specific location. And so on this slide here, you can see the project location, which is marked by a red pin, and the everything in the yellow hatched area is the designated scenic area in the Trinidad Coastal Plan. And so the primary reason to locate this facility here in this specific location was that they were looking for a location on Patrick's Point Drive that was outside of the designated scenic area. And you can see Patrick's Point Drive is almost entirely within the designated scenic area here, with the exception of this small section of Patrick's Point Drive right here. You can see the red pin, which is where this has been installed. We did speak with PG&E also to further understand whether undergrounding this facility would be feasible. The response from PG&E was that in order to meet utility standards and to underground it here, they would also need to underground a substantial number of substantial miles of the above ground utility poles that are already in existence on Patrick's Point Drive. So you're looking at a substantial amount of ground disturbance and a substantial amount of additional cost. So this is just showing you again what's proposed. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
All right. Mike, go ahead.
Well, from our previous conversations that we were talking about, Cliff, the reason for locating it here, has that been answered by PG&E? We were talking
Yes.
about the need for it to be right there, not just the scenic area, but because of the transformers themselves and how it works.
My understanding from PG&E is that the need for them to be here is that it has to be somewhere along the distribution line on Patrick's Point Drive. And that's needed in order to ensure that there's uninterrupted service when they do improvements at the adjacent substations. And so this particular location was chosen because there's no other location except for this short segment of Patrick's Point Drive, which is outside of the designated scenic area in the Trinidad Coastal Plan.
Did they, PG&E, say any dollar amount as to the cost to underground and then take the poles out? Because I think taking the poles out would be great on the scenic area.
Mm-hmm. We did not receive a cost estimate.
All right. Any other questions for Cliff? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to open this up for public comment. And is there anybody who wishes to speak on this item? Please come forward, sir. Welcome. Yep, lift your mic up a little. Maybe it's not on.
You know, and I just want to review what we know about this regulator. The existing regulator was botched as far as its location. You just turned it back off. Hold on.
I really apologize. It sounded the same to me, so.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
It obstructs my driveway on Patrick's Point Drive. It's a traffic hazard, as is substantiated by Mr. Cipher's prepared presentation, and it was a posted nuisance by the county, as I showed you at the last hearing. The current application is for a new regulator. It's not after the fact. They're seeking to move it. It's going to be in a new location. It's going to be 10 foot taller, and the only question is, if they're going to relocate it anyway, why not disappear it in terms of aesthetics? We know that this is an aesthetically sensitive area, and this unit is out of place. Patrick's Point Drive is a mapped scenic corridor with iconic ocean views and ancient redwoods. These are the types of resources the Coastal Act was designed to protect. This unit has no place, an industrial installation has no place on Patrick's Point Drive, and 5 of my neighbors have come forward to complain to you about this. I've also mentioned that the resolution that's proposed is defective. It supports the position of the new regulator based on consistency with existing infrastructure. The only existing infrastructure, anything like this in the area, is a nuisance. Findings should not be based on such evidence. But the regulator has to go somewhere. The question is where? It was designed to serve the Big Lagoon and Oric substations. That's admitted by PG&E in their paperwork. That's 20 miles away. The utility also concedes that alternative sites have been identified which avoid the scenic corridor. Why not put it in one of those sites? The commission's actions are many. You can approve it or you can deny it. If you deny it, you'll encourage the utility to pursue one of these other viable alternative sites. You can also approve it with conditions. Commissioner O'Neill asked about undergrounding, and you could condition approval on undergrounding. Sure, it's expensive, but as Commissioner Newman says, if there's undergrounding, whether it's miles of lines or not, it's good for fire and it's good for this sensitive scenic area. If you approve it.
I'm going to give you just a little more time because we had
Thank you.
some problems in the beginning.
I'll be quick.
So.
Thank you. If you approve it, conditional upon undergrounding, this will put the utility to the test as far as its commitment to the placement of the facility on Patrick's Point Drive. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment and bring this back to the commission. So, what are the thoughts?
I have some thoughts.
Go ahead, Peggy.
You know, it costs about 5 times what I found for underground as overhead, but I think what they're saying is that they'd have to, you know, they can't just go up and back down. They'd have to go underground for a little bit, so it'd probably cost them, you know, $1 million or something. But, you know, it is a coastal zone, and I think we need to protect the coastal zone. I think that they could propose an alternative. I don't like the fact that they have just not, you know, failed to respond or come forward. And I don't know what's going to happen if we don't approve it. They, you know, are they just going to say, okay, we're taking out all the service to Oric and Scotia, or where, or not Scotia, what's the other town? You know, are they going to just abandon this project and walk away, or are they going to look for an alternative site? Maybe they have one. I know whenever I've done a project, you have to have multiple sites. You know, you have to say why this one over that one, you know, you can't just pick one and that can be done. So I would suggest that we not approve it at this site, or at least I wouldn't approve it at this site unless it's underground. And I would like to see some alternative sites. I would like a little respect from PG&E that they would, you know, submit some sort of comments and not just, you know, rely on the planning staff to carry their water.
All right. Thomas, you had your hand up.
Sorry, my mute button keeps giving me a minute there. Through the chair, a question to staff. If this project was approved as presented with moving the poles, is there any way would it be illegal to put on a condition of approval if logging trucks were to damage that facility? It would be PG&E's financial responsibility to repair that and not the landowner, because that's what I remember a lot of public comments I read about the landowner being impacted to be able to utilize logging trucks in and out of there.
You want to take that, Director?
Sure, I'll take that. I mean, so the question is, if a logging truck or another vehicle were to hit it, you're saying that the responsibility of repairing it would be PG&E's and not the vehicle that hit it?
Through the chair, I'll clarify more. Specifically, if that driveway being impacted, that's what I remember in a lot of public testimony I read before. If that driveway was being utilized for hauling logs out of there and they had a logging truck that accidentally hit that, would it be illegal to make PG&E at responsibility because they aren't choosing to move even farther away from that driveway?
I would say that if we're concerned that the location of it would be subject to being hit due to a driveway, that's a bad design and shouldn't be approved, and not impose a condition because that acknowledges that we're concerned that it's a bad design.
Thank you.
All right. I was just told that the applicant is on the line, or possibly is on the line. So I am going to open up public comment to let them speak, but I'm only going to do it for the applicant. I don't think there's going to be anybody else. So 3776, go ahead. Are you there? Star 6 to unmute yourself. Are you there, 3776? Last chance. All right, I'm going to close the public comment and bring it back. Their hand just, no, just, we're going to come back to the commission. All right, so are there any other thoughts on this one? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'm in agreement, as you heard part of my questions about the what would happen here, and I think I would deny it at this point and have PG&E come back with alternatives to where they're proposing it to be. This is a scenic corridor, even though it's just outside of it. I don't see a problem, except for, of course, the cost. But I see lots of good things that could come about because of it being undergrounded or vaulted, and having those poles and lines taken out twofold, for the scenic view as well as then for possible fire. So I'm not going to vote for this as it is right now.
All right, thank you, Mike. Any other comments? I'll make one. I work with PG&E a lot. When they want to do things, they do whatever they want. And when you want to do something, it is paramount to having teeth pulled. So I don't think it's asking too much of them to justify why they can't underground this system so that it was out of the visibility issue of the corridor there. I thought that's what they were going to come back with tonight, to be honest, but it just seems like it just came back to us and everything's pretty much the same. So I would be into either giving them another opportunity, or I would be voting no for it the way it is. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, they did make a minor change. They did say they wanted to move the poles and replace
Yeah.
and move it over away from the driveway, but
But
that doesn't address the real reason.
The discussion last time was, could it go anywhere between there and Oric, okay? And they moved it 20 feet, 40 feet, whatever it was.
Just for one of the items that was being discussed, which
Yeah.
was about the private property owners with driveway access.
So-
So that was one of the things that we were talking about.
Yeah.
The other is what we've just discussed here about alternatives to having it put right there in that scenic area that is so close there. So I'm where I'm at.
Okay. Brian, you have your hand up, and then Thomas behind him.
Yeah, I just wanted to express my frustration that our comments from the last time we saw this, which was not very long ago, have not been incorporated into the project. I am prepared to deny it, to send a message that we expect either there to be a feasibility analysis for someplace far outside of these special coastal scenic resources, which we have a duty to protect, or a solid justification for why the immediate area needs this equipment for its own purposes, which I don't understand there to be a whole lot of development to be happening in that area. So that's where I'm at.
Okay. Thomas?
Kind of in line with fellow commissioners, and I think that's why originally I was hoping to put this to a date certain. I don't remember if we had continued to a date certain, just to basically give the applicant encouraging timeline to present evidence to justify the project. And what's before us, I don't feel that there's the evidence to justify, being as it's been said that this is for Oric and Orleans, or maybe I'm wrong on the other town, but I don't see the evidence there to justify the project where it's at. So if this was any other project, not PG&E as the applicant, I think there'd already be a motion on the table and we'd be done with this project with a denial. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of where my headspace is at.
A question.
Okay. Peggy?
So I also have a question as to what happens when it's denied. Does that mean they're going to drive out there and take it down and tell everybody, oh, well, you don't have services anymore? So I would like that question answered. What happens when it's denied? What's the alternatives to keeping services?
I think they're obligated to keep service. I think that when it's denied, there's now a facility there that isn't authorized. I would expect them to appeal a denial.
If I could just add, I mean, to be clear, what PG&E has stated to us is that this voltage regulator is needed to serve the customers on Patrick's Point Drive in the event that they need to maybe not shut down power at the Oric substation, but do improvements that detract from the ability to service the customers on Patrick's Point Drive. So because the utility lines run along Patrick's Point Drive, what PG&E has stated is that it's needed to be there.
Right, and I understand that, but my question goes to what will happen if it's denied? Will they take down infrastructure, or will they just continue to be a nuisance until they get fined, or, what is going to happen? And you said you said they'll probably appeal it?
And then if it's denied, they would be required to remove it. And I think what I understand from PG&E is that, potentially they would just have that potential service interruptions when they do those improvements on the substations.
Okay, Melanie?
Yes, I just wanted to, voice my agreement with my fellow commissioners as well. I think it was pretty clear that we had sent it back because we would have denied it, and having it come back almost the same, is a message that they're not willing to adjust the project, at least at this time. And so I think that the obvious response would be to deny it. In terms of Commissioner O'Neill's questions, I think those are a concern too. And it sounds to me like, at least from what we've heard from the surrounding neighborhood, is that perhaps disruptions would be preferable to having this there. So, and in any case, that's not anything we have control over at this time anyway. Thanks.
Thank you. Thomas?
Well, through the chair, I believe Cliff answered some questions, and I just want to clarify with the question through the chair to Cliff. What I heard you say is this regulator is specifically for residents along Patrick's Point Drive or residents possibly to the north, or not north, south of this regulator. Is that correct or incorrect?
That is what PG&E has stated to us, correct.
Okay. And then lastly, through the chair, to staff, in the presentation, I did see that technically this is outside the scenic area of the coastal zone that was mapped. Is that correct or incorrect?
That's correct.
Okay. So my decision might be weighing a little bit differently. Got to think about that.
All right. Brian, did you put your hand back up?
No, I did not.
Sorry. All right. Well, where do we want to go with this?
I'll make a motion to deny the application as it is.
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion on that?
So could I ask you to at least give us some direction to prepare a resolution to identify that the
Well, I think that what I would like to see is alternative sites. And we haven't been provided those. Within this, there's several miles of potential sites, and we weren't given that. That was the question that we had. And then other than they don't want to do it underground because it's going to cost money, well, they don't care what it costs us to do things. I mean, you have to do what you have to do. And so those are my issues in that, I wanted to see that presented or have a discussion with them, and they have failed to come forward to answer our questions. That's my reason for wanting to deny it.
okay
It's not that I don't want to see services. I want to see services improved to the community. I don't want to see anyone lose services. And I hope that that's not the case based on our decision that they're going to say, oh, well, then we're just not going to do it. I want to encourage them to provide services to this community and not just use us as an excuse not to do it. But they need to answer the request that we had is what are the alternatives to this project? There's always the alternative of doing nothing, but not in this case because they don't have the proper permitting. So what is their other alternatives?
Could I offer that the request to explore alternatives and to look at specifically undergrounding has to do with concern that this is located along a narrow road, could interfere with the public health and safety, vehicles entering and exiting sites, that even though this is slightly outside the designated scenic area, that it is still a scenic roadway, and that it should be screened to the extent possible, and the applicant has not demonstrated that this is the least visually impactful design.
Sounds good.
And what about anything with a fire? With the
We could
lines?
identify that it has not been demonstrated that this is also the has the least probability of having any kind of fire, wildfire danger
Yeah.
in a high fire hazard area.
So,
The basis for the denial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
okay. So, we have a motion then, and we have a second to deny this project. And the director gave some advice as to what to add to that, so if,
Well, what we'd like to do, what I was specifically asking, is for you to direct staff to prepare a resolution for denial reflecting your action, and I was trying to give you some of the findings and evidence to support that action.
so would we be, we've never done that as far as I can remember, so would that come back to us then? You'd bring that back, or?
You have given us direction to
Okay.
prepare resolutions in the past.
And
Okay.
then would that a resolution have to come back, or is it already approved by the fact that we approved that?
Basically, what you're saying is that there'd be a couple findings. Finding number one is that it would be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare. And that would be related to the location adjacent to a narrow roadway, potential conflicts with vehicles, and
It could
both.
also have visual impairment to motorists.
And then there would be conflicting with the visual sensitivity area within the coastal plan. So there'd be two findings for denial.
But the question was, does the resolution have to come back to us to approve, or no?
It depends on what you want to do. The way it's being structured is no, it would not.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
So I'm in agreement with that, and Peggy, you're the motioner, so you're fine with that. Yeah. So am I.
All right, any further discussion on it? Go ahead, Thomas.
Just wanted to clarify, through the chair to the director, wouldn't there be a third finding somewhere along fire safety regarding to health and safety? Because I remember, if I remember hearing correctly, there was something about fire safety in one of your findings.
The fire safety would be evidence for the public health, safety, and welfare finding.
Okay. I'm good with that.
Thank you. Any further questions? All right, seeing none. Tripp, roll call vote, please.
Thomas Mulder,
Yes, with the findings identified by the director.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
and Alan Bongio.
Yes. Thank you, Tripp. Motion carries unanimous. All right. So that brings us on to, we continued that one. Oh, wait, no, we continued it, but we're going to open it up if there was any, the Ford Parcel Map Subdivision and Coastal Development Permit. We did continue it already to the 7/27 meeting, but I'm going to open it up for if there was anybody who.
Actually, we need a motion and a second to continue those to 7/21.
Okay. But
So
we
moved.
also said that we were going to open it up if there was anybody who wanted to speak on them. So should we do that before we move,
Yes.
continue to move them? That's what I was,
Yeah.
where I was trying to head.
Sorry.
All right. No, that's good. Just keep me in line. All right. So
we should do these separately, I
yeah,
believe,
that's,
right?
I'm going to.
Okay.
So the Ford Parcel Map Subdivision and Coastal Development Permit in the Myers Road, McKinleyville area. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this? I'm seeing no hands up. Oh, go ahead, Thomas. No, okay. So, seeing none, I would ask for a motion to continue this to the meeting of I got 27, you said 21st. 21 or 20? 21, okay, I apologize, I wrote that down.
So moved.
All right,
Second.
Second.
we have a motion, a second, any discussion?
Or the 21st?
21st. So, Tripp, a roll call vote, please.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Thomas Mulder,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
and Brian Mitchell.
Yes.
All right. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Tripp. That brings us on to item number 4, which is the Beer Minor Subdivision Coastal Development Permit and Special Permit in the Mckinleyville area. And once again, I'll ask if there's anybody who wishes to comment on this item. Seeing none, I will close the public comment and ask that we continue this one to the 7/21 meeting.
I'll move.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
All right, Thomas, second. Roll call vote, Tripp.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Thomas Mulder.
Yes.
All right, motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Tripp. All right, go ahead, Tom, or Director, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. A bit of housekeeping. The Vesuvio Gardens on the agenda, it says continue to the July, a date uncertain. Could I just verify with Mr. Johnson, is that intended to be a July date or an uncertain date?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. That's intended to be an uncertain date.
Okay. So could I just, for clarity, for the record, ask you to make a motion and a second to continue that to a date uncertain?
Okay.
Which item is that?
This is item number H1, Vesuvio Gardens.
So moved.
I'll motion to,
So we got a motion. I don't,
second.
we have a second. I think that was Melanie on the second. but-
Yeah.
Guys, let's try and clean that up a little bit, please.
All right.
Record all this.
Whenever you're ready, Tripp.
Thomas Mulder, Thomas Mulder,
Yes. Sorry, I couldn't tell if that was you. The microphone cut out.
no worries. Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
and Peggy O'Neill.
Yes.
Thank you, Tripp. Motion carries unanimous. All right, so that brings us to item number I, Department Reports, Small Cultivation Site Propagation Policy.
Thank you, Chair. This is a item that the Planning Commission had asked for us to agendize and bring back and allow the commission to consider how to address a policy that is often discussed and somewhat controversial. And that has to do with what percentage of the ultimate cultivation area should be allowed for propagation and nursery space. Historically, the number that's been used is 10%. And there was an effort earlier in, I believe, 2021 to make a modification to that, to raise that to 25%. That met with a lot of competing thoughts on it, including those from the industry. And so as part of a series of modifications that were being made to the CCLUO, that was taken out at the during Planning Commission consideration, because there were people within the industry, there were opponents from the community at large that just thought that expanding to 25% was entirely too much. At the last hearing, the June 16th Planning Commission hearing, the commission considered a small cultivation site that had asked for cultivation area over 10, or propagation space over 10%, to allow for a couple different things, including the ability to do some genetic testing and propagation. And that also it was pointed out that that 10% number didn't allow sufficient space for a small cultivator to be able to adequately develop their own either seed stock or clones. So we've brought this back and have presented some options and ideas for you to consider. And we really asked some questions that you might want to consider in terms of what it is that this perhaps policy change would be intended to do, and then how do you want to address it, whether it be a policy or an ordinance amendment. But the fundamental question that needs to be asked is, what is the purpose of expanding the propagation space? Is it to allow increased productivity? Is it to better support small farmers? Is it to allow genetic experimentation outside the cultivation area? And I think those are probably some important considerations for the Planning Commission to struggle with. We've provided some options in which you could consider focusing on small farms less than 2,000 square feet, smaller farms of 5,000 square feet or less, or you know, is it all farms just demonstrating that what they really want to do is do genetic experimentation? Once the Planning Commission decides on a preferred approach, we can then bring back a letter for the commission to authorize to be sent to the Board of Supervisors. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Director. Any questions for the Director? Go ahead, Thomas.
Through the chair to the director, what is the largest cultivation site permitted in Humboldt County? And what is the largest cultivation site in the state that you're aware of?
The largest site that I am aware of in Humboldt County is in Willow Creek, and it's approximately 8 acres. The largest site that I'm aware of under one greenhouse is, I think, 5 million square feet, which is 125 acres.
Thank you for that, and I apologize for not relaying that question to you beforehand.
It's okay.
Any other questions?
I would, I know one woman that came here and did a presentation on why they needed additional space, and if that presentation, if there's any basis in fact in that presentation that there is a need, then I think that once we permit a facility, we should want it to be successful. If there was a plan that they submitted that, you know, that was a sound plan, or this could be part of the policy to expand propagation beyond the 10%, you know, supported by this reasoning or, you know, basis of recommendation that they would come forward with, then I think that should be part of their application. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I've got a thought on this. It just seems to me, I saw Melanie put her hand up, but apologize, Melanie, I had mine up ahead of you. It seems like to make things simple, it would be more consistent to just have it on the amount of footage that we approve, whatever that is. If it's a small farm and it's 2,000 feet, that's what you have to work within. If you want to make 10% of that your propagation area, or you want to make 50% of that your propagation area, that should be what it is based on. That's what we base our water use, our electric, everything that we look at, and then we've been allowing them to, you know, use this 10% number, I guess, to be over that, and it's something that's been brought up before. I just think for consistency, we should just say that's the area you have to work in. What you do in that area is your business. You know, leave it up to them. I mean, if you've got a 127 acre parcel, you can decide how how much you want to be in propagation. Same on a 2,000, so. Go ahead, Mike.
So,
Then
and
Melanie,
that
you'll
was,
be next.
that was part of my questioning in here and part of my comments. Right now, we have the square footage as what is being permitted, and then we allow for an extra 10% for propagation. But I'm in agreement with Alan about, okay, if you want to have more propagation, then take out some of the square footage of what you're growing then. If somebody can talk to me about why that would not be a viable thing, I would be open and all ears for that. I understand about the better supporting small farmers because possibly, you know, the 2,000 or less square footage small farmer doesn't have that extra space to use then. So I would be open to taking a look at if it's a small farmer under 2,000 square feet, to possibly have that extra leeway into propagation to help with their growing and consider genetic experimentation in that form and fashion. So those are my thoughts at this point.
Thank you, Mike. Melanie, you're next.
Thank you, through the chair. The reason that I had requested that this come back was because we had questions surrounding research. So in my mind, there are two issues here, one of which is re-looking at the percent area that we allow as propagation in above and beyond what the square footage is on their license. And then the second issue is one where, and this is one that I was hoping we would address, which is having a separate research license or research allowance. So, you know, we don't have a lot of other models here, but if you look at the Cannabis Act, for example, in Canada, which admittedly is a far more thorough document because it covers the entire country, you have research licenses and then you have cultivation licenses, and they're actually separate. And propagation is under cultivation. So you don't have, and I realize that we couldn't do that for various reasons, or we voted against it or whatever, but propagation in my mind is just part of cultivation. And so I'm not against raising the percentage for propagation if it's done consistently. Like I said last time, I don't think that it's advisable for larger farms, which is why I suggested maybe the ones that are 10,000 square feet or under should have a higher percentage for propagation. Because just looking at what data we do have, you know, and this is not just in cannabis, when you have a much, much larger farm or you know, many other businesses, for example, you do have a lot more leeway in terms of what is available. So typically, from what we've seen, you don't use the maximum amount. Let's say if you have a 45,000 square foot, whereas if you have something for 8,000 or 10,000, you're probably right at your limit. And we have been looking for social reasons for ways to increase the viability of the small farmers. And so what I think we have here are two distinct situations. And for the propagation part, I would be in favor of increasing the percent allowable for propagation from 10% to 20% for farms that are under 10,000 square feet. And, you know, hopefully that will allow those farmers who wish to do research to do that. As a separate issue, perhaps because it wasn't put on the agenda for today, I would like to see maybe a special research license where you would have a designated amount of space allotted to do research. And, you know, that could be, that should be separate from cultivation. Propagation is part of cultivation. Research isn't necessarily part of cultivation. There are a lot of people out there, scientists or otherwise, who wish to perhaps do research in genetics that don't have a license. I don't feel like those two are necessarily tied together. So, yeah, I'm still, like last time, in favor of increasing the propagation area for small farms. I do think that propagation should be under cultivation entirely anyway, but if we can't revisit that, then I would be in favor of increasing the percentage to 20% for small farms. And hopefully that will allow those small farmers to do genetics research if they wish to. But I would also like to see, and I do realize we have a hiring freeze and all sorts of time limitations, but it would be nice if there was a research license available, because I do think that that is one of the strengths of Humboldt County in terms of cannabis, is that we do have a lot of potential and history in terms of the genetics. I apologize, that was very long.
Thank you, Melanie. I had my hand up next, so I'm going to follow up on her. I agree. I didn't think about having a special license for the research part, but that's interesting thought. I do have concern, though, with the propagation being increased unless it stays under the total amount of footage, just because the water use, the electric use, everything that goes on there is the same whether you're, so we're allowing them basically to get 10% if that's the number we go with, or if it was changed to 20, we're allowing that much more use that we're just kind of looking the other way on. And I mean, half the time our meetings are spent talking about how, you know, we're in the middle of a drought, or how we're, you know, not doing enough solar energy or alternative energy systems. And then we're just kind of going, we'll look the other way on that. So I think that it just needs to be one number given. You put in for, you know, whatever that number is, that's what you have to cultivate within. And you can choose. We don't need to tell them what they know, can figure it out, what they need to do in propagation and what they need to do in plants. I mean, let's let that be their issue, not ours.
Well, I fundamentally agree. And that's why, you know, I said I would prefer to see a separate research license. And, you know, in terms of propagation is cultivation. And, you know, that's how it is in the Cannabis Act and many other places around the world. That's what it is. And so it should be just part of your number. If we were to change it, though, at least if we limited it to under 10,000 square feet, you know, then we're talking about 200 to, well, wait a minute, 10%. Yeah, 10% of 10,000 square feet to 20% is not as impactful as shifting from 10% to 20% of, let's say, a 45,000 square foot farm in terms of the environment. And so I do see that as less impactful if we have to go, you know, with the option where we are considering increasing basically cultivation space, because I 100% agree propagation is part of your cultivation. So if we do go down that road, I would definitely want to limit it to under 10,000 square foot farms. But like I said, I see propagation as cultivation. I think it should be part of the overall number. I do, like last time, I think there is room to encourage genetic research here in this county, which we really haven't done in terms of policy. And so having a separate research license that could be obtained by someone who already has a cultivation license, that might be the most attractive option.
All right, Director wants to comment to that, and then it'll be Thomas and then Brian.
I just need to point out 2.0 does have provisions for research permit. Okay, that can be permitted under 2.0. That already is in our regulatory context.
All right, thank you, Director. Okay, Thomas, you're up.
Okay, so I might be the biased one here, but I'm going to tell you from not only my own personal experience, but all the farmers I've encountered and talked to, there's never enough nursery space. And it constantly makes it challenging to have genetic diversity. It constantly is challenging to utilize some of your nursery space to propagate up, some strain to get enough 100 plants of one strain to run part of it in your crop to see how that yields, to see if that's a worthwhile strain due to yield, your microclimate, its testing, and all the other things. So you can never have enough nursery space. I'm just going to tell you that. As far as energy use and water use, something to throw out there, there's a lot of people that utilize no energy in some of their nursery space. You go out there beginning of June through about the middle of August, you use absolutely no lights in your nursery. You just have water to keep them alive. So, maybe they can supplement that water consumption with rainwater catchment or something like that. There's no energy as far as that impact. Water use is minimal in the nursery space as the plants are smaller, so they aren't drinking as much water. And it's just, I think it's really, really hard to explain the need for this. And in my personal opinion, not just for like myself, I just think for the whole community to really, really be able to pursue what we've done as a county and pursue those different genetics. There's thousands of genetics created in this county. We need to promote that diversity. And I think that can be done. I understand the concerns of energy and water use, but the whole nursery area isn't utilized 12 months out of the year. You downscale. Most people I know, they downscale in September and scale back. And then about January, start ramping back up, and they aren't even using their full nursery space till probably April. It's not 12 months out of the year. So I would just encourage everyone to think open-minded and really wrap their minds around that it's not used 12 months out of the year, that whole nursery area.
Can I ask Thomas a question?
Go ahead, Peggy.
I have a question because I don't know anything about, when you just pull a number out of the sky like 20%, how do I know that that's enough or not enough? And the other question I have is about the math. If you say do it within the existing space, are they losing 10%? Because before they had the cultivation area plus they had 10%, and now you're saying do it, so are they losing ground, or I don't know how that works.
Well, until those plants are ready to be planted, then I guess they can take up that same space and some other. Go ahead, Director.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to understand is that there's a bit of an evolution that's occurred here. And that the way that we have been approving cultivation areas going way back is that was also the taxable area. And so if you start to put the nursery space into the cultivation space, then you're taxing
Right.
that.
They lose.
Yeah, you're losing at that point.
Right. That's what I see it as, a
And-
loss.
And then the state doesn't require the nursery area to be in the cultivation area. So there has been a movement within the regulatory system to really focus on cultivation area and nursery as separate components.
So what is a reasonable amount of cultivation? Is it based on the total size? Is there a sliding scale? I have no idea, and so I couldn't just say 20% or 15%. It doesn't make any sense to me to pull something out of the sky.
And you said something earlier that was really, really important. And it really comes down to, I think, understanding what it is that the cultivator is attempting to do.
Right, they have a plan.
Yeah. And that was our early approach, is that you could go above 10 with justification. And then if the justification seemed sound, we brought those forward to the Planning Commission. One case in particular tested that, and the planning commission said, no, we're going to keep this at 10%.
Well, they wanted to be consistent with everything they'd already approved.
Yep.
But now we're talking about moving into a different direction of coming up with a recommendation.
Well, and the other thing I'd just like to point out, and I'm not trying to advocate either way when I say this. This is just recognizing some things that are going on. Right now, from a market perspective, this is what I know. Commissioner Mulder can correct me. I'm sure others will correct me if I'm wrong. But is that outdoor is not selling. So the things that are selling are either being done in light deprivation greenhouses or mixed light or indoor. And so one of the things that's advantageous for people is to have that space to allow those plants to get as mature as possible before moving it into the cultivation space. And so it really is taking a look at the fact that the industry has changed. And it is about taking a look and do we want to set up our cultivators to successfully compete in this statewide market? They're not competing in a Humboldt market. They're competing in a statewide market.
And I think we should be doing that because we've already allowed all of these other impacts to happen, whether we liked it or not. You know, we approved these permits and now we need them to succeed because they've made all these impacts whether we liked it or not. So why tie their hands now but it needs to be based on sound science or, you know, cultivation practices that are recognized in the industry. The lady was very, I don't know if she was making it up or if it was sound information that she brought forward, but it made sense to me, and so I think that we should support these permittees or whatever they're called now, the cultivators, to be successful. And if it requires them to have additional space, and that's based on how many acres you have or how many, square footage you have, I don't think they should have to pay taxes on that area. And I don't think they should lose cultivation area because they want to have additional area. And I know there's going to be impacts with water, but we have encouraged them to go to solar, to go to rainwater catchment. So, we've tried to minimize those impacts. And if we consistently do that, then they should be allowed to have that space. Whatever that space is. And I can't just pull it off the top of my head. It has to be based on some sound, practice or, acceptable practice and I can't say what that is because I'm not a cultivator. That's just my opinion.
Brian, you've had your hand up for a long time, and then Mike. And then Melanie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask how the bonus 10% was handled during the CEQA documentation phase and how adjusting that could potentially necessitate further impact analysis or mitigation measures to be included with any policies to change the 10%?
That is a critical question that does need to be struggled with. The 10% is a recognition that in both ordinances, 1.0 and 2.0, there was ancillary facilities, including clone rooms and propagation space that was considered. And so the 10% was trying to be conservative and reflect the fact that there was some small amount of space that was anticipated. We would want to, and I think we reflected this in the report, but depending on what the Planning Commission chooses to do, we would want the opportunity to evaluate the environmental document to determine consistency or further actions that are needed based upon that.
All right.
My other concern or comment lastly here would be that if we make allowances for anything other than the smaller cultivators, I would want to make sure to put in additional points along the inspection to ensure that that's not an end around to becoming a commercial nursery without the appropriate licensure or having more cultivation area that they're not being taxed on, again, as a go around. So those are things to consider as well.
Mm-hmm. Mike, go ahead.
So what this comes around to again is taxation. Is that correct, Director?
Thank you for asking that question.
Because we are looking towards changing our structure, aren't we?
Well, the tax structure in our practice has already changed a little bit. It's now based upon the area that was actually cultivated.
Not how much it yielded.
Not, well.
How much was sold?
No,
Let's put it that way.
It's not based upon that. It is
Which isn't that part of the direction that the public and what the supervisors were leaning towards or listening to as a possibility to where the cannabis becomes more like the rest of the agricultural community, where you're taxed on what you are selling?
That has been a discussion, but to my knowledge, there has been no direction given to go out and pursue any modifications to Measure S to accomplish that.
Well, that's part of what I think should be part of this discussion as well. I think that it should be part of this discussion because part of what we're kicking around here is about the size, because you're being taxed on that size. What if we just, take that out to a certain degree? We still need to look at the size of areas because of the impacts. But take that taxation out of there to where they're not being taxed on the size of what they're growing. It could be a possible part of it, but I think the greatest part should be what they're selling. And then we have to really watch on the black market as well. I know that's a whole discussion right there that really would need to be looked at. And the reason why it's at where it's at right now with the size being taxed is so that it does take into account, of course, anybody that is not above board and doing it the right way. So those are some more of my thoughts there on that.
Melanie, and then Thomas,
And then I have,
and then Peggy. Go ahead, Melanie.
Thank you. Yes, Mike asked one of the questions or comments that I had. And so I guess I'm just curious as to how many research licenses we have currently. I think that's something important to know. And if we're not looking at that as something separate, given that 2.0 does address it to some extent, then we're really just looking at, again, propagation space. And, I tend to agree with the chair that, I mean, propagation space is cultivation space. And I mean, really, we're just talking about bumping up everyone by another 10%. And I would only be in favor of that if it were the smaller ones.
All right. Thomas, you're next, and then Peggy, and then we're going to get some public comment.
So just wanted to add a couple more things. What the director was speaking about the market is 100% correct. Another reason a lot of people are going to light dip is to manage workforce. You're only harvesting so much at a certain amount of time. So then you can do that with less employees, and then drying storage, harvest storage space, all those kind of things come into play. And then as far as cultivation space, a lot of people that do light dip, they don't plant the whole area at one time. Say a 20,000 square foot farm is probably going to plant 5,000 square feet or maybe even less at a time and just continually rotate and cycle. So I don't know what the difference would be if they were allowed another 10% of nursery space that's outside their cultivation area that they can have as a clear identifiable premise with the state and utilize that for a few months, and then utilize, once they decide to plant their other cultivation area, I don't know. You have to really jump on a farm and really understand how it works, especially right now. Farms are harvesting and flipping and replanting and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of moving working pieces, and I can't stress enough how important it is to have genetic diversity. I know many cultivators that would not be in business right now if they didn't utilize their space to the best of their ability to have genetic diversity and different strains that nobody else on the market has. And that's it.
So what if we tied it, the amount that they would get to their mitigation of impact? So if you're saying, I've got 100% water, rainwater collection, I'm to 100% solar, so I've minimized my impacts through mitigation, so I get 20%. If I'm the one that comes in here and says, I don't want to do anything other than, my well and PG&E power, then you get 10%. So maybe there's a way, like, you should get rewarded because you've gone totally, minimal impacts as much as you could. And that could be somehow factored in.
I think that's something to look at. One of the things that I'm wondering is that if it would be helpful to schedule a field trip to a willing farm to go out and look at how things are actually done. So and that's often what comes up, frankly, in the discussions is the bad things. But maybe it would be good to go out and look at what right looks like and to see what we're trying to accomplish and then to think about the very questions that Commissioner O'Neill, you're asking is that, okay, if we're doing it right, how can we incentivize that? I just throw that out as an idea because it seems like we're grappling or grasping for a lot of different things, but perhaps it would be helpful to actually see what this looks like in practice on some good sites.
Because I don't feel, I couldn't tell a logger how to log, and I couldn't tell you how to build a house, maybe a little bit, but not very much, but, so it's really hard for me to sit here and go, 10%, 15%, it should be based on need of some sort, and your, what it's gonna take to be successful without overtaxing the environment. So, like I said, if you're doing the right stuff, then you should be able to expand. If you're not, then, and maybe there's also the scale, the smaller, versus the very large. It's not going to be the same percentage.
All right. So let's try.
I have a question. I guess it got overlooked. I wanted to hear from the director how many research licenses are currently in place and what the director feels are the current incentives to apply for a research license.
So I believe there's only one, and I believe part of the struggle that people have with applying for one is it requires them to come in under 2.0.
Well, then that clearly shows that the incentives aren't there. And like I said, I'm really looking at this as an opportunity to increase the number of cultivators or other people who are interested in doing more research, because I think we all know that that is one of the strengths in this county. We're not going to compete on almost anything else. And, to have only one person have a research license tells us right away that there aren't incentives to have a research license. So I think that's something that we really need to look at.
I think that probably hasn't been looked at that hard because there's probably not a lot of revenue that comes in from a research facility, and there is from the farms. So I think that's why that's taking a back burner. All right, I'd like to open it up for public comment. We've been going quite a while on talking. I don't know if I don't have any hands up, but if there's anybody in the public that would like to speak on this one, 7429, go ahead.
Good evening. This is Roby again. I have just a little side thought here, and I think the market for local cannabis farms success will have a lot to do with marketing, and specifically marketing the small family farm with sustainably grown cannabis. And Humboldt County cannot compete on a quantity level. Humboldt County may succeed on a quality level with land-based environmental stewardship, such as like grass-fed beef or the forest stewardship lumber, small family farms. And marketing is the key to help the consumer move towards that and the sun-grown, sustainably grown, and the superior genetics. So I just want to throw that into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, 9687.
Hello, this is Kelly with Margaret Advisors. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Kelly.
Great, thank you. So just wanted to point out some key points. The water and light usage is minimal compared to canopy space when you're talking about nursery. And as we pointed out in our presentation last time, crowded nurseries are incredibly less efficient. These plants require more water and energy usage when they're in a crowded environment and get stunted. So part of the need is that having that additional nursery space to create a more efficient operation. I also wanted to point out that our farmers who are under 2,000 square feet have already dropped out of the industry. They did not receive enough support to stay in it. The state does not restrict dedicated propagation areas. These areas themselves don't generate revenue. It's the mature canopy area that does. And that's why the potential for taxation of these areas would be incredibly unfair. Those who oppose the dedicated propagation and require the use of the existing canopy space are suggesting that reducing the allowed canopy area for R&D actually creates a disincentive and lowers the potential revenue for these farms. The reality is that the large farms are coming online. The large state licenses are expected to be issued soon, and it'll be difficult for legacy farmers to survive. However, development of unique genetics, supplemented with the benefits of Humboldt's special microclimates, allows for legacy farmers to develop special boutique craft cannabis products that are found nowhere else in the industry. If this benefit is to be realized, it will require that these farmers have the nursery space, not only for healthy vegetation for the current crop, but also for the development of new plants. As we have shown in our presentation for the last meeting, the proper vegetation space is necessary for the efficiency and the development of new cultivars. We ask that the Planning Commission recommend to the Board of Supervisors that all Humboldt farmers be allowed to utilize additional nursery space with priority given to small farms with 10,000 square feet or less. It is only with the support of the regulators, including commissioners and the supervisors, that the industry will be able to continue to contribute to Humboldt's local economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, 7108.
Hi, this is Bonnie again. I'm coming from a different angle. When the ordinance was originally approved, the existing cannabis cultivation farms were already doing their propagation and genetic experimentation within their existing cultivation areas. That's how we got to all these different strains and stuff. This has been going on all along. Granting 10% bonus space to do this, I think, was very generous. And I feel like if they want to do more propagation or genetic experimentation within their cultivation area that's been approved, then they could not be taxed on that area or whatever. And it seems like this is all so we can have not one crop a year, two crops, 3, 4, 5. So it does expand the impact. And this thing of these greenhouses not going in the winter, I mean, I've seen plenty planning on operating year-round. So, and that it's need to think about the environment and just the overall impacts. And, you know, a 5,000-foot grower can say, well, you know, I can't make it at you know, with this amount of space, and then you got the 10,000, he stays in the same state. Then you got the acre one saying, hey, you know, this is small compared to what's going on in some other place. We have to be realistic, and I feel like we need to stick to 10% and give a special thing for people that want to expand more of that in their existing cultivation space by a tax break or whatever it is. But like this is expanding square footage and all that fits in.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment and bring this back to the commission. So, Thomas, you have your hand up.
So I'm going to share some other history. The early on projects, quite a few that were approved, nursery space was never a question. It was just where are you propagating, where are you cultivating for taxation purposes. There's a lot of people that tore down indoors that technically they might have used for nursery space during part of the season when they weren't growing their indoors in the middle of the season, and those have gone away. There's people that utilized drying sheds in the winter months for their nursery space until they can move them outside where it was warmer, and then use those drying space or those same sheds for drying the harvested product throughout the summer. I think there's a lot of ways to look at this to minimize impact, like multi-use of buildings that could be used for nursery space in the winter when they're not being used for drying, and then be utilized for drying when it's time to dry. I think there's ways to allow additional nursery space where it's just sun-grown nursery space, no artificial lighting. And if the water concerns there, have them, do rain catchment. It's only going to be used for about 3 months out of the year. And I don't know. I could share a lot of personal stories, but I'm not trying to make this personal about me. I'm just trying to say that there's not enough nursery space to be successful with a lot of these businesses, and a lot of them are doing what a couple commissioners are recommending, is basically foregoing some of their cultivation area to have enough of their nursery space to be able to be viable with the rest of it, but they still are taking a 10 to 15% loss on their potential yields and potential income with the downturn in the market. That's negatively affecting them, and it could make them go away. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Anybody else have comments? Go ahead, Mike.
So I am open hearing more about the small 2,000 or less farmer being pretty much crowded out because of pricing and that we would look towards the 10,000 or less having the additional space. It would be, I think, in our best interest here for Humboldt to allow that to happen, to support, and the small farmer definition would be 10,000 square feet or less, not 2 or 5. And
It's probably going to be in the neighborhood of about 30% of all applications. 30.
30.
Yep.
So 30% of our applicants are 10,000 square feet or less. Those are the ones in the pipeline. Those are the ones that have been approved. What about if it's just what has been approved, what do you see in the pipeline coming up?
It's probably pretty consistent all the way across, and it may be higher than that, frankly. I'm
Yeah.
trying to
This is
remember the
just
math.
off the
It's off the
hip
top of my
here.
head.
Yeah.
You know, most of the cultivation permits that we approve, let me say 30% of all of our permits are zoning clearance certificates that require no discretionary action. Some of the pre-existing are less than 10,000 square feet, but because of where they are, they require a special permit or a conditional use permit. And so then I'm going to change that to, I'm going to move that upward. The number's higher than that.
More like 40 or so. Yeah.
Probably 40%.
So then,
Yep.
Sorry, Mike.
Like up to 20% or 20,000 square feet. That would get probably up to, that would cover at least 2/3 of all applications.
so on my thoughts there, I will continue that. We need to then have some criteria on that extra space where we can, or are we just going to do it just in general, 25%? That would be the question of the time then. If we're going to increase it, it would be, are we going to incentivize it for in increments because of how you're handling your farm? Or are we just going to do it outright up to 25%? That would be the next question. If we come to a consensus that that is a good threshold at this point in time. So that's what I'm throwing out.
Okay. There's more hands up. So Melanie, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I would really like to see something towards research. You know, even as the caller from last time who just called in again this time has mentioned, you know, one of the primary motivations for asking for this is so that we can encourage the continuance of the genetic legacy, if you want to call it that, here in Humboldt County. It is an area where Humboldt County can compete. And so ignoring that whole side of it, I just don't feel comfortable with that. I would prefer to see a new research license or some sort of incentive for the research license where it's specifically for research, you know, with enough space to propagate and test and all of that, and not just start raising percentages across the board. You know, I was under the impression that that's what we were really going to be discussing was the research aspect and, you know, really trying to protect and move forward with our genetic research here. So I'd be in favor of having a research license with the associated space and propagation and all of that needed, or just trying to incentivize the one that the director says one person holds right now. And as for raising propagation space, again, it's a very separate issue. And I'm not sure where I stand on that yet. I don't feel 100% comfortable with just increasing propagation space without the research angle.
So how do you decide if they're doing research? I mean, I don't understand. Like, do you just say, well, I got 10 right now, but I want to do research, so give me 10 more? And then what's the difference between research and, what, you know, and anything else? You don't kill your plants after you research them, do you?
I mean, through the chair, it could be as simple as just identifying that if people were declaring a portion of their cultivation area to be done for research, that would be not considered cultivation space. The struggle is then that shouldn't be sold. That
Yeah, it's not gonna happen. So if you said, okay, we'll give you 10%, and you can have 20%, and if you wanna do research, you can have 25, I don't know if that's where we're going, or
Yeah.
if this is I'm just wanna do research, you know, or do I wanna add research to my existing grow?
Well, and just if I can, to respond, I'm not at all wanting to be argumentative here, but one of the things that is important to consider is you're conducting the same activity, whether you're doing research or growing flower for commercial sale.
Right,
It's the same activity.
right,
And so the environmental effects are the same.
right.
And it's really coming down to, as I think Commissioner Mulder mentioned, if people are committing a certain square footage to doing the genetic research, do we want that to be separated out from the cultivation area? And I'm hearing that there may be some sympathy on the part of the commission to allow for that and to create a pathway for that without having to go and get a separate permit for that. And if that's the case, I think that's something that we can probably look at fairly simply.
I think we need to, I mean, there's gonna be some major changes when the larger grows across the state. Wasn't there a 5-year limitation, and now that's gonna happen, and so we need to make sure that our businesses are gonna be successful and not tie their hands too much, because, and I'm not saying it's a free-for-all, do whatever you want, but if our industry fails, we don't have anything to replace it right now, and it's pushed out a lot of other types of businesses that have gone away that we had here locally. And all of us that lived through the end of, you know, the forest industry know that the cannabis industry is the only thing that kept us going. So now if we lose that, we're gonna be in a big trouble. So we have to, I think, be supportive of our cannabis growers without, you know, opening up the doors and letting anything happen. But I think that if they're saying they need additional space, that space could be for research, it could be for, you know, their nursery within reason. And if maybe it's tiered to incentives, if it's under 10,000, okay, you can have that space. If it's over 10,000, we need to see some mitigation measures put in place to show that you're minimizing any kind of additional impacts. And then if people are just playing us and they're just trying to get more space so they don't have to pay taxes, that's up to you guys to figure that out, the regulators, because there's no way I know. And, you know, and if you start, I think it is a little unfair to tax based on your space if you're not making any money, but it's going to be hard for the county to, you know, to really gauge what kind of money a business makes. I don't know how you would do that. You don't.
Well, yeah, that is the simplicity of the cultivation area, and because it's
just this one
verifiable.
thing. Either that or you lower the rate that you tax them on, but I don't think you're going to be able to figure that one out, how to do that, and without. So, again, I'm for increasing the space if it's necessary to make them successful, and I don't know that. That's has to be based on someone with more knowledge than me. But if they're showing that, hey, we're minimizing our impacts, we've done everything that you guys have asked us to do, then why not? Why do we always want to continue to be a big, you know, yoke around their neck? I mean, now we want them to succeed. We already gave them all of these hoops they had to jump through to get licensed. Now they finally made it out the other side, and then, you know, we need to be supportive. That's my opinion, but maybe not everyone shares that opinion.
Yeah.
And I don't think Thomas and I ever agree on anything, so if this is the one time, I don't know.
Both smile.
That was a great one. So I actually really like where Commissioner O'Neill's going with maybe possibly, okay, 10,000 square feet or under, you can have up to 25%. If you're over 10,000 square feet, you need to show the county how you're mitigating those impacts of potential increased water usage and potential increased energy usage. So that way it supports the county's environmental document. It's kind of what I heard her say, but if that's what I heard her say, I agree with her 100%.
I just put my hand up, and I would go along with increasing the propagation space if it is calculated into the space when they're determining how much water storage, how much electricity, how much, the impacts to the roads, everything that we look at in every project, okay? And if the project can handle that with whatever is proposed, then I'd be for that. But the way we're doing it now, we're just kind of looking the other way about that extra 10%, and that has not been, in my opinion, right. But I haven't really been very vocal about it. There's been a few, people that have got up and spoke about it, but not too much. But I think the right way to do it is plan for it and give them that, if to help with the industry. I agree with that, but.
Isn't small plants maybe I'm misunderstanding, but isn't a nursery small plants? We're not talking about full-grown plants that are going to take the same resources as a nursery plant.
They don't, but they take resources. They don't take the same, but they take resources, and they take, you have to get the fertilizer out there to put them in, and you have to, water them, and you have to do all the things. So I'm not in the industry. I don't know much about it, but I know enough about it that, to know what we're talking about here. And I think that we're getting someplace with some compromise, but I can't see on the great big farms how they should be. They've got so much space that it doesn't make much sense to me to give them any more, but that's my opinion. All right.
So I think now Mr. Ford could come back with something.
I think we can draft up some policy options to bring back to the commission based upon what we're hearing.
I think one thing that was brought up that it's very interesting to me, and I know Melanie at least was very interested, is the research side of it. So maybe that's a different discussion than this, because this was just about the small.
I think it could be incorporated into the percentage. A certain percentage of what they've asked for in an increase could be set aside for research. And if they don't want to do research, then okay, you don't get that percentage. But if you do, then a certain percentage of that increase is for research.
And research is genetic experimentation, right?
So if you're
I'm just
willing to
putting it
commit-
out there for those lay people that may be listening at some point
So you
on their
get this
recording.
percentage, but if you want to do the genetic research, you get this much more. I don't know.
But then again, the question always comes up: who's going to regulate, or who's going to be determining whether they're actually doing that? Where do you?
And that's where we can get some
I can't put any more
suggestions.
burden on the planning department than we already have, knowing that you can't even do what we've asked of you.
Well,
let's be honest. You're doing, I know, the best you can and as much as you can, but there's just been so much permitted, and there's just not enough bodies to oversee that. And so who's going to regulate this? Who's going to be saying whether they're doing research or they're just growing some more juvenile plants so they can have a bigger crop this year?
What do you have in the research part now? How do you regulate it? The one guy? Or?
It's just part of the regular inspections. And let me say, we are out again tonight, looking for lights.
Yeah.
And let me also say, we've hit 420, we've done 420 inspections so far this year.
That's great.
So we're looking to we'd like to hit 1,000.
I wasn't saying that to be critical of the department. I feel like we have been unrealistic in asking things as a commission, knowing that you didn't have the resources to
I appreciate
do
the
all that.
recognition that every time somebody wants to do something, it requires resources to do it. I truly appreciate that.
So that is part of my ask here is if we put out there that we want more input from the Growers Association and growers as to what would be best in this fashion for those small growers, maybe we're putting it out there right now to where we can get some input into the planning department for this draft to come forward here to then talk about more in depth. So I would put it out there to the public right now and the Growers Association. Thomas, you put the word out there. We're looking for input to the director for some best practices if we were to do what we're talking about doing here.
I think Thomas has his hand up. So. Melanie, you're next.
Is it my turn, Chair?
Yes.
Yes, I did, Commissioner Newman, I did try to put the word out, and unfortunately it's harvest and replant time, so that's why unfortunately everyone's working in front of their computers doing metric data entry right now, because this is the best hour for metric to actually work, not during the middle of the day. But what I originally put my hand up for is, you know, the genetic library. That's also important. A lot of farmers, they're going to have multiple strains, and they may not actually know what strain they're going to plant in all their different greenhouses as they go along until they get back market research, distributors, and retail. Sometimes they're slow in getting that information back to farmers as so what they're going to be cultivating, because the intention is to cultivate things that will sell and help people. So I will share a personal note here. I have 3 strains that are just in preservation mode personally that I take up nursery space with to keep those genetics alive, because nobody else in the world has them. And, you know, that's burn nursery space, but also those genetics are alive for another point in time.
Interesting. Okay, Melanie. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, given that we're asking for something to come back to us, I really disagree with the quantity over quality. Basically, by upping propagation space, we're really just upping cultivation space. I mean, we all know what happens to the plants after they're propagated. It's not really going to help. We're not going to compete in quantity. Might help the smaller growers, yes. And if that is something socially we want to do, then that might help somewhat. But I thought we were really focusing here on the quality and giving some incentives to growers who wish to continue or push forward the genetic breeding that Humboldt County does have somewhat of a reputation for. And I think that's the best investment. And so I would really like to see something that focuses on the research license. And yes, it will require inspections, but you know, it can be much the same as you get a grant to do something. You have to have a report, you have to have some evidence. Yes, it will require inspections, but as the director just said, the inspections are increasing. And what really is the percent of growers who are going to falsely file for a research license and then just propagate more plants? I don't know. I'd like to think it's low. I know we only hear bad news about the morals of people, but I don't think it's going to be a majority. And so, yeah, I mean, we will need inspections. We will need someone to look at the evidence and reports. But overall, the gain from having something to incentivize people to go into genetic breeding, I think is really the most valuable approach, and it's what I would support.
Okay. Thank you, Melanie. Thomas, did you put your hand back up?
Yes, I did, Chair, but I don't know if it was before your hand. So I talked a bunch. Why don't you go and then I'll go, if that's fair.
I'm going to kind of diverge here. Not that we need to do that, but twice this person's name has popped into my head and thought. And the first time was when Roby Tenorio was talking about that marketing is the thing that we need to do. And when we were starting the whole cannabis thing, there was a guy that was always at the podium, and he was so well spoken, and he kind of spoke for the industry, and his name was Luke Bruner. And I've never heard that guy's name too much, not very much again. But last I heard, he had a cannabis shop in San Francisco. And my suggestion would be to reach out to Luke Bruner, because he was very articulate. He knew the pulse of what was going on. And I think this guy could tell you what would be the right thing for Humboldt County, or have some suggestions on it. I know that's just kind of a strange thing to bring up, but it came into my head a couple times tonight. I always really listened to everything that he had to say when he'd get up at the podium. And I just thought, I don't know, it couldn't be hard to track him down. Anyhow, side note, I'll shut up. All right, so now, Thomas, you're up.
Okay. So I want to touch back. It kind of touches a little bit of a nerve to me whenever, the use of, how would you put it, dishonest or anything like that. I would say a majority, my personal experience, a majority of people that came forward is because they found a pathway forward to no longer hide what they're doing and to promote a legacy heritage thing that they can pass on to the next generation and show that, government and the community can work together. So I wanted to share that side note. And then quality over quantity. Yes, the increased, it's not trying to push out more quantity by having increased nursery space. You have a plant that's going to be most healthy when you're vegetating, if you can give it 1 square foot of space to properly branch out and have its best expression of a plant for quality in your nursery space. But because it's hindered with only 10%, people are having to cram that same plant that should be in 1 square foot of space into half a square foot of space. And I think that's where a lot of the ask is coming from. So that way, farmers can have nice uniform crops that all the plants have the proper amount of airflow and pest management and all those kind of things. And I think that's what I don't know anyone that would want to have the more space and then just cram more plants in there. They would want to have that more space to be able to space out their plants. And that's my experience.
All right, thank you, Thomas. Director, do you think you have enough to get going on this?
Absolutely.
All right. So is there anything else on this before we move on to what we said we were going to touch on to agendize for another meeting? So I'd like to ask that the director come back so we could have a discussion on water catchment and alternative energy systems as to we've been just kind of adding those two projects, and I'd like to get to the point where it's a policy, it's not a gray area that we do on some and we do on others. So I'd like to have that discussion. Is there anything else that we want to have on that discussion? Those are the two that we talked about earlier in the meeting, so that's why I bring that up.
Your roads, you always want to improve the.
Well, I've beat that horse, and
I think it would be a county decision as to how much, and I don't know what they put into from cannabis tax to road improvement, but it would be nice if they had increased budget so that they could set aside a certain amount in these rural areas.
I'm just going to say I'm a realist, and County Public Works can't keep up with the roads that they have, and to take anything else on and do, most of these are private roads anyhow. It's just a waste of time to even have that discussion. So I like where you're going with it, Peggy, but
I have a lot of experience with county roads, and they can do good things too if you give them, I've worked on a lot of projects with them, and it's been very successful.
Yep.
But I go get the money for them, and then I utilize their labor, and
All right. Thomas, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm trying to figure out a way to tie that into that grant that the county has that they're hopefully going to be able to take applications for in a couple of weeks here, to maybe pause that discussion or potential policy change till this grant goes through and we see what happens. But I agree 100% that water storage is good for the environment, it's good for the community. I have a hard time changing policy. But the way in which you're asking to go about it, I support doing it that way. And I just wanted to add a side note, and that's why I had a hard time with those other rain catchment topics, because it wasn't consistent with what was on consent. So I appreciate consistency.
I agree. Any other thoughts? All right, Director, if you could bring us that back as a topic for discussion, we'll have like we did tonight on Souther. I thought that was a very good discussion, one of the best we've had in a long time. So, anything else before we adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add through reading of the majority of the minutes that you have the sole authority to end our meeting, so feel free to adjourn us without a vote. You have my full support.
Well, I appreciate that, Brian.
Ditto.
But I'm having so much fun. Let's just stay a while longer. Okay. With that, we're adjourned. Good night, everyone.